Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
For the past 3 years, I've been working at this upscale steakhouse. It's the kind of place where business people come to close deals and couples celebrate anniversaries. The steaks cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week, and the atmosphere is usually pretty refined. I work in the kitchen as a line cook, and I'm deaf. Most of the time, that's not an issue at all. My co-workers know how to communicate with me, and I do my job well. Sometimes, when we're short-staffed and I'm not swamped, I'll help carry plates out to tables. It's not my main job, but I don't mind helping out. Yesterday started like any other Monday. Mondays are usually our slowest day, so when 3 waiters called in sick that morning, nobody was too worried about it. We figured we could handle whatever came in. That was before the party of 13 showed up without a reservation. 6 adults and 7 kids walked through our doors around 6 in the evening. Right away, I could tell this wasn't our usual crowd. The kids were running around and one of them was wearing a sparkly birthday crown. This was clearly a children's birthday party, which isn't exactly what our restaurant is known for, but we don't turn away paying customers. So we seated them at our largest table. The order came back to the kitchen, and I had to double-check it. Every single person at that table ordered steak, even the kids, and every kid wanted theirs well done. I've been cooking for years, and it always makes me a little sad to cook a good cut of meat until it's like leather, but the customer gets what they want. We got all 13 steaks going, and I helped plate everything up. Our waitress was running around like crazy trying to handle all her tables by herself, so I grabbed a few plates to help her carry everything out. I brought the last plate I had to the birthday girl, a kid who looked about 8 years old. She was wearing the sparkly crown and had a huge smile on her face. When I set her plate down, she started talking to me. I could see her mouth moving, but obviously, I couldn't hear what she was saying. I did what I always do in this situation. I pointed to my ear and shook my head, the universal gesture for being deaf. Then I quickly headed back toward the kitchen to find our waitress and let her know the table needed something. I've done this hundreds of times over the years. Most people figure it out right away, and there's never been a problem. I can read lips and speak, but it's much easier and faster to just get someone else to help customers. That way, there's no confusion and the customer gets taken care of quickly. About 10 minutes later, my coworker tapped me on the shoulder while I was prepping vegetables. She looked stressed out. She told me that the mom at the big table was asking for the manager. The woman was complaining that I had ignored her daughter when she asked for something. I sighed. This happened sometimes. People didn't always understand the gesture and they thought I was just being rude. I asked my co-worker if she had explained that I was deaf. She said she had tried to explain it to them, but when she told the little girl what it meant, the kid got upset and started crying. Now the mom was even more angry than before. Before I could respond, our manager came charging into the kitchen. She was talking fast and looked annoyed. I had to ask her to repeat herself twice before I understood what she was saying. She told me I needed to come out and apologize to the family right away. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the dining room. I was confused about why I needed to apologize, but I followed her out. The scene at the table was ridiculous. The birthday girl was sobbing like someone had died. Her mother was holding her and making a huge show of comforting her. The other adults at the table looked embarrassed, and the other kids seemed confused about what was happening. The mother started talking angrily to the manager, waving her hands around and pointing at me. Her face was twisted up in this expression of pure disgust, like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. The little girl was still crying, and every few seconds, the mother would kiss her head and glare at me. Other customers were starting to stare at our table. I could see people putting down their forks and turning to watch the drama unfold. This was exactly the kind of scene that didn't belong in our restaurant. Finally, the manager turned to me. She told me that the woman wanted me to apologize to her daughter for upsetting her. I thought I must have misunderstood. I asked her to repeat it, but she said the same thing. She was asking me to apologize for being deaf. The manager said it had been upsetting to them and told me to just say, I was sorry. The mother was still talking, still gesturing wildly and pointing at me. The birthday girl was still crying, and now some of the other kids were getting worked up too. I told her there was no way I was doing that. The manager looked like she might explode at any second. She demanded that I apologize immediately. But there was absolutely no way I was going to apologize to these people for being deaf. If they had wanted me to apologize for not understanding them or for any confusion, fine. But I'm not sorry I can't hear. Actually, at that moment, I was pretty grateful for it, because judging by the looks everyone was giving this woman, she wasn't saying anything pleasant. I told the manager again that it wasn't going to happen. I'd had enough of this circus. I turned around and walked back to the kitchen, leaving the manager to deal with whatever tantrum was happening behind me. I looked back once and saw the mother standing up, looking like she was screaming at the manager. The manager looked frantic and she was nodding frantically. About 20 minutes later, the manager found me in the kitchen again. She told me she had to comp their entire meal. She also said she was writing me up for refusing to apologize to that family. I asked her if she was really writing me up for not apologizing for being deaf. She said I could have handled it better and that I had upset that little girl. I just stared at her. In 3 years of working at this restaurant, I'd never had a problem like this. Most people are understanding when they realize I can't hear them. Some are curious, some are sympathetic, but nobody had ever reacted like this family did. I told her I wasn't apologizing for who I am. The manager walked away, talking about how difficult I was being. I went back to my prep work, but I was fuming. The whole situation was insane. The next day I came into work expecting to find a write-up in my file. Instead, I found out that the manager had been fired. Apparently, after I left, several other customers had complained about how the situation was handled. The family had also left terrible reviews online, but not about me. They complained about the manager's handling of the situation and how uncomfortable the whole scene had made everyone in the restaurant. The new manager called me into the office my first day back. She told me that what happened the other day was completely unacceptable. She said I should never have been put in that position. She also told me that if that family ever came back and anyone recognized them, they would be asked to leave immediately. I've thought about that night a lot since then. I've been deaf my whole life, and I've dealt with all kinds of reactions from people. Some are curious, some are awkward, some are overly sympathetic. But I'd never encountered anyone who was actually offended by my disability. The whole thing was so bizarre that I'm still not sure I fully believe it happened. Word got around to our regular customers about what happened. Now I have people asking for me to bring their food out, and I've gotten more tips in the past week than I usually get in a month. I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, and like most farm kids, I learned to drive way earlier than most people. My dad had me behind the wheel of his tractor when I was just 9 years old. I shot up like a weed that year, and he needed the extra help during harvest season. Now, if you've never driven a tractor, let me explain something important. These machines have all the usual stuff: clutch, brake, gas pedals, and a steering wheel. But they also have implement controls on the right side for whatever tool you're pulling behind you. Plows, harrows, seeders, you name it. You need to keep one hand on those controls most of the time, which means you drive with your left hand on the wheel and your right hand managing the equipment. I spent years driving tractors and big manual transmission trucks through our fields. Even when I got older and started driving regular cars with automatic transmissions, I kept the habit of resting my right arm on the center console. My dad does the same thing when he's driving with my mom. It's just second nature for us farming folks. Fast forward to my sophomore year of high school. I was finally old enough to take driver's education, which my school offered as an extracurricular class. I was excited because I knew I was already a good driver, and I figured this would be easy. The written portion was a breeze. I aced every test, every quiz, every assignment. Then came the practical driving portion. Our instructor was this woman I'll call Karen. She was thin with a permanent scowl etched on her face. She had zero patience for questions and seemed to hate teenagers in general. The driving sessions were scheduled alphabetically, and I got stuck with the Saturday morning slot right before Thanksgiving break. It was bone cold that morning, but there hadn't been any snow yet. My friend gave me a ride to school where Karen was already waiting in the exam car with the engine running. There were three of us scheduled that day: me, my friend, and another girl whose mom dropped her off. I was going first. We went through the pre-driving safety checklist, and then I got behind the wheel. Everything felt normal. I put the car in drive, rested my right arm on the center console like I always did, and pressed the gas. Nothing happened. Karen sternly ordered me to put both hands on the wheel, her voice cold. I could feel her foot on the examiner's brake. I apologized and put my right hand back on the steering wheel, but it felt completely wrong. I've been driving one-handed for years, and this felt awkward and unnatural. Without thinking, my right hand dropped back to the center console before we even left the parking lot. She hit the brake again. Karen repeated her demand about keeping both hands on the wheel. I tried to explain why it felt weird, but she cut me off immediately. She told me that if I wasn't going to keep both hands on the wheel, I could use my little phone to call for a ride home. I protested that I didn't have a phone, and I really didn't. This was 2009, and my parents had refused to buy me a cell phone. I was probably one of the few kids in my class without one. Karen scoffed and said not to be ridiculous, claiming that all kids had phones. She put the car in park and gestured for me to get out. I thought maybe I could just sit in the back seat and wait for my turn again, but she had other plans. She repeated that I needed to call for a ride home. My friend tried to stick up for me, saying I really didn't have a phone and asking if I could just try again, but Karen threatened to fail him too if he didn't drop it. He was torn, but ultimately he chose his driving test over helping me out. I don't blame him. We were just kids, and failing driver's ed was a big deal. So there I was, stranded in the school parking lot on a Saturday morning in freezing weather. The only shelter was the little entryway by the front doors. I sat there shivering, wondering how I was going to get home. My parents thought I'd be busy with the driving test for a couple hours, and they didn't expect to hear from me. After about 20 minutes, some guy I'd never seen before started honking his horn at me from the parking lot. My parents later gave me a lecture about trusting strangers, but I was too cold and desperate to care. His car was warm, and I was freezing. Turns out he was the older brother of the girl in my driving group. She had texted her family about what happened, and he drove straight over to help me. He graduated 6 years earlier and was just visiting for Thanksgiving. He drove me home, and I'll always be grateful for that. When I got home and told my mom what happened, she was furious. She called my dad, who was out in the fields, and he was just as angry. They both tried to file complaints with the school, but there were no security cameras back then. So it was just my word against Karen's. I ended up with a nasty cold that lasted through Thanksgiving, and I was officially flunked out of driver's education. I wouldn't be allowed to retake the course that school year, which meant the failing grade would stay on my transcript and knock me out of the running for valedictorian. When May rolled around, my dad hired some neighbors to help with the field work so I could take a summer driver's education course in the city about 30 minutes away. He paid for it himself and drove me there and back every day. He joked that it was so I could be more useful around the place, but I knew he felt bad about what had happened with Karen. He knew I'd earned the chance to get my license. The summer instructor was completely different. His name was Mr. Saint, and he was this big guy with a booming laugh who actually listened to his students. When it came time for my driving test, my dad pulled me aside. Dad told me he wanted me to explain to Mr. Saint, before I even got in the car, that I'd been driving tractors for several years. He said to tell him how the controls are laid out if he doesn't know. I didn't really understand why, but I agreed. When Mr. Saint called me over for my driving test, I explained about the tractors and how I was used to driving one-handed because of the implement controls. He nodded and said he was familiar with farm equipment. During the entire driving test, he watched me carefully, but never once touched his brake. When we finished, he was all smiles. Mr. Saint complimented my driving, saying that, just like any farming kid he'd had in his courses, my driving was top-notch. But he asked why I felt the need to let him know ahead of time. I told him my dad had told me to. Mr. Saint asked if he could speak with my dad. I pointed to where my dad was waiting in his truck, and Mr. Saint walked over. They talked for a few minutes, with Mr. Saint taking notes on his clipboard. When they were done, Dad waved me over. I asked what Mr. Saint had wanted to talk about, but Dad just grinned and said it was nothing much. He wouldn't tell me what they discussed, no matter how much I pestered him. A few weeks later, I had my learner's permit and was racking up driving hours for my full license. When school started again in the fall, some friends asked if I'd be retaking driver's ed. I told them no, I'd already taken the summer course and had my learner's permit. That's when they dropped the bombshell. Karen had been fired just a week before school started, and Mr. Saint was taking over her class. During lunch that first day, instead of eating with my friends, I went to find Mr. Saint in what used to be Karen's classroom. After some stammering, I asked him what had happened. He explained that my dad had recommended him when Karen's teaching license was revoked. Dad had stayed in contact with him after their little chat and told him about Karen's treatment of me and possibly other students. Mr. Saint passed that information along with his records to the county, who called Karen in for a performance review. I wasn't the only one she'd flunked over the years for minor issues. In our farming area, lots of kids had the same driving habits I did, and she'd been failing them left and right for things that weren't actually safety issues. But what really got her license revoked was my parents. They'd finally found people who would listen to them about how Karen had neglected her duty by leaving students stranded at the school. I was the final straw. The school board also installed a security system so they'd have video footage for future incidents. My driver's education grade was completely purged from the system, along with anyone else who'd taken the class under Karen, both good and bad grades. This put me back in the running for valedictorian, which made my parents incredibly happy. Karen never taught again. Her license was permanently revoked, and she couldn't renew it, all because she was too stubborn and entitled to listen to a farm kid explain why he drove the way he did. She could have just asked me about it, maybe even learned something new. Instead, she chose to be a tyrant, and it cost her everything. I was 22 and working as a second-year apprentice carpenter back in 2012. I'd just landed this job up north in the oil and gas fields, which was a big deal for someone like me. The money was decent, but the work was weird. We were on 12-hour shifts, but they only gave us about 4 hours of actual work. Our real job was just to stay safe and not become another workplace accident statistic. I'd always been good with numbers and math, which made me stand out a bit in the trades. Most of the guys weren't exactly sharp when it came to calculations, and I had this habit of catching mistakes. I wasn't trying to show off or anything, I just didn't want our crew getting in trouble for screwing something up. The thing is, I'm not a big guy, never was. I'm average height and pretty skinny, but I've got a quick tongue and can think fast on my feet. My dad taught me early on that if you can't intimidate someone with your size, you better be able to outsmart them. That's how I ended up in the crosshairs of this fourth-year guy on my 5-man team. Let's call him Karen because that's exactly what he was, an entitled jerk who thought his seniority gave him the right to treat everyone else like garbage. It started when we were doing some measurements for a project. Karen made a calculation error and I corrected him. Not to be a smart mouth, but because I genuinely didn't want our whole crew getting written up for a mistake. Bad move on my part apparently, because from that moment on, I became his favorite target. Karen was about my height but built like a tank. I'm talking serious gym time, probably with some chemical assistance if you know what I mean. And he had that angry energy that comes with it. He'd find little ways to mess with me throughout the day, hiding my tools, giving me wrong information, just general harassment stuff. A couple of weeks later, near the end of our shift, I headed into the saw shack. That's basically our workshop where we could hang out and kill time until the shift ended. When I walked in, Karen was there with 2 guys from Newfoundland and 2 other workers. The Newfoundland guys were hilarious. They had these crazy accents and were always cracking jokes. Really good people. Karen was standing by the table saw and told me to come take the output from it. I walked over and immediately saw what he'd done. Written in big black marker on the side of the table saw were the words, "The apprentice doesn't even know the difference between 20 millimeters and 200 millimeters. You're an idiot." The room went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see what I'd do. More guys started filtering in since it was almost end of shift, and I could sense them reading over my shoulder. Here's the thing, Karen wasn't wrong about the metric system. I'd been doing residential construction before this job, and residential uses imperial measurements. Commercial uses metric. I honestly didn't have a good reference for metric measurements yet. It was true and everyone knew it. But my dad always told me that if someone's bullying you, you have to stand up to them. You'll probably get hurt, but bullies look for easy targets. If you fight back, they'll usually move on to someone who won't. So I looked around the room and asked if anyone had a red marker. One of the Newfoundland guys handed me one, looking confused. I walked over to Karen's message and started making corrections. I fixed his grammar, added proper punctuation, and corrected his spelling mistakes. The first Newfoundland guy started laughing and announced to everyone that I was correcting the spelling. The entire room erupted in laughter. Everyone was cracking up except for one person. Karen was furious, and his hands were clenched into fists. Karen looked at me with pure rage and told me I was going to die for what I'd done. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter stopped pretty quick after that. We had to go to the lunchroom for our shift debrief, but Karen didn't show up. Apparently, he grabbed a belt sander and spent the rest of the shift sanding his message off the table saw before the next crew could see it. But that threat he made was a big mistake. See, we were flying in and out of the worksite, and Karen lived about 3 hours away from me. We shared the same major airport for our flights. I knew I had to do something before we ended up on the same plane. I went to my foreman, who was also from Newfoundland and close to retirement. This guy did not like drama or complications. I told him I needed to give him a heads up about something. I explained what happened and about Karen's threat. The foreman got serious and said that wasn't good, then told me he'd make some calls. We had this quasi-union thing going on. I never really figured out what they did besides collect dues, but they had a union steward on site. This steward was the laziest guy I'd ever seen. He had this hammer that looked brand new because he never used it. Like he could have returned it to the store for a full refund. The steward hated doing paperwork and especially hated dealing with troublemakers. So when the foreman called him about Karen's threat, he got creative. The steward told us he was calling this an incident. Now, an incident up north wasn't just an accident. It could be anything that threatened safety or created problems. And with all the drugs floating around the oil fields, every incident triggered a mandatory drug test. It was company policy. The steward called Karen in for the test. I think the threat alone would have been enough to get him fired, but the drug test was ironclad evidence that couldn't be disputed. Karen failed. Hard. Once the paperwork was processed, they went to Karen's room, made him pack his stuff, and escorted him to the airstrip for the next flight out. Just like that, he was gone. The next day, one of the Newfoundland guys found me in the saw shack. He asked if I'd heard about Karen. When I asked what about him, he told me Karen was gone. He'd failed his drug test after threatening me, and they'd shipped him out yesterday. The whole crew was talking about it. Word spread fast in a place like that. Karen had been causing problems for months, bullying different people, and now he was finally gone. I kept working that job for another few months without any issues. Turned out, once Karen was gone, the whole atmosphere improved. Other guys started talking about how he'd been making their lives miserable too. The funny thing is, I never meant for it to go that far. I just wanted to make a point about his lousy writing skills. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.